Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our next to last Black History Month event. Our theme this year was celebrating Blackness, as you may know if you attended other presentations. Um, there's a link being shared to sign in, so students, community members, everyone, please just sign in so we can make sure we have that. And as I mentioned, we are recording, so if you don't want your camera on, please turn it off. We have two people taking questions. They are named question 1 and question 2, but they're really named Kevin and David. So if you have questions, please direct it to them and they will be able to ask the questions. But I believe we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. With that, I'm just going to introduce our two amazing speakers. So our first speaker is Tara Peterson. And hold on one sec. Okay, great. Tara is YWCA Glendale CEO, and she is an expert in the field of violence against women and is responsible for executive and administrative leadership at the Y. She has played a pivotal role in revitalizing our YWCA. Many of you know the history. And she also leads the Coalition for Anti-Racist Glendale, which helped draft the resolution apologizing for Glendale's racially exclusionary history as a sundown town. If you don't know what sundown towns are, you will know at the end of today. And I also want to introduce another amazing person, Pastor Todd Leonard, who is currently at the Glendale City Church in Glendale. He is dedicated to building a radically inclusive congregation devoted to community transformation for the city of Glendale and in the city of Glendale. He is also proud to be part of YWCA's Coalition for an Anti-Racist Glendale. And I also joined the group fairly recently. So just the amazing work being done by the coalition. I want to applaud that. And with that, I will turn it over to Tara.
Great. Thank you so much, Hoover, for that introduction. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you here during your Black History Month celebration to talk a little bit about Glendale's exclusionary past, as well as some of the things we're doing with the coalition to move towards healing and reconciliation. I'm going to show a PowerPoint presentation because the last time I presented to college students and folks, I was told that you have to have a PowerPoint and I didn't have one. So I actually have a PowerPoint presentation. I also have a couple, a little bit of some videos that I will show during our presentation. And I also wanted to also just thank Todd for joining me in doing this presentation. Todd and I started talking about Sundown Towns and Glendale Sundown history probably a couple years ago, a few years ago. And so to be at this place where we're able to bring forward a resolution and see it successfully pass in the city of Glendale was a huge victory for us. And so thank you for being here with me as well, Todd, to help me through this presentation. I also want to say that I am not an expert on Sundown Towns or the history of Glendale. And so again, this is really a presentation about our experiences, what we learned along the way, and how we were able to create change, and also about the work that we're going to continue to do to really move forward an equitable and just Glendale. So I need to give that disclaimer. So with that, I will start with the PowerPoint presentation. All right, so, we're going to talk about the Sundown, the history. Just for you, of those of you who don't know, this is our YWCA Glendale building right down here. It's a pretty beautiful picture. If you haven't been to our facility, hopefully once COVID is over, you all can come and visit us there. We love our facility. It's been in the community for over 80 years. So that's just a little side note. So we're going to give you an overview of Sundown Town. We'll talk about the city of Glendale and why the city of Glendale was considered the poster child for Sundown Towns. We'll also share some of the exclusionary practices that city of Glendale enforced either through law enforcement or through other practices. and some of the oral history that we've also learned throughout this process around Glendale's exclusionary practices. And then we'll talk about our Sundown Town Resolution and how we were able to come together to form a diverse coalition that worked together to move forward the passage of the Sundown Resolution, and why that was so important first step for City of Glendale to take. And then lastly, we'll talk about our coalition for an anti-racist Glendale and what we're doing to create an equitable and just Glendale. So before I get started, I want to start with this scene from Lovecraft Country. So if you have watched this TV series, go ahead and raise your hand, give a clap, give a heart, whatever it is that you like to do. Put something in the chat to let me know that you have watched this series. If you've never watched the series, and some of you like me who watched it and needed a support group from this series, because it was a very, although fictional, a very heavy and emotional film to watch, and so TV show to watch. And so I want to show the scene because it really highlights, although fictional, really highlights the fear that Black folks who were in Sundown Towns really felt. And what's really interesting about this scene is the characters are driving from Chicago to Lovecraft Country, and they are faced with some of the same discriminations that most people think just happen in the South, but it didn't just happen in the South. And that's how Sundown Towns kind of existed beyond the Southern states. And so I want to quickly share that, and I have to stop really quickly and go to the scene here. So bear with me, please. Thumbs up if you can hear that.
Oh, we're just passing through, taking a little bathroom break, sir, is all.
Any of you all know what a sundown town is?
Yes, sir, we do.
Well, this is the Sundown County. If I had found you pissing in my woods like animals after dark, it would have been my sworn duty to hang every single one of you from them trees.
It's not sundown yet.
Sunset is at 7:09 today. That's 7 minutes from now.
Then we'll be out of the county in 6.
Now, that's impossible heading south on the road you're currently on, unless you were to speed. And if you were to speed, I'd have to pull you over.
Then we'll head north.
That might work. Why don't you give it a try?
We will, sir.
Is it legal to make a U-turn here?
Aren't you a smart one? Now, ordinarily, I would consider a U-turn a violation. But if you ask me real nice, I might just let it go this time. Please. Oh, you can do better than that. Say, pretty please, will you let this smart nigga make a U-turn here?
Pretty please, will you let this smart nigga make a U-turn here?
All right. This is one time since you asked so nicely.
How far, Uncle George? We got 2.5 kilometers to the county line.
Can we make
Wait, I'm sorry. It's L3. We got to pass the train tracks.
So I won't share the rest of the scene with you, but I hope it shows just an example of, some of the experience. I hope you guys can see my screen. Oh, you guys can't see my screen right now. So sorry. Let me get to the screen again. Sorry, bear with me, folks. And I wanted to show that because I really feel it's important to just bring in kind of today's culture and the television show, because it really does, even though fictional, really does show the fear that folks had living in Sundown, or not even living in Sundown Towns, but being in a Sundown Town, and what are some of the things that Black folks had experienced in a Sundown Town. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Todd, who's gonna talk a little bit more about Sundown Towns and some of the learnings from his experience in learning about the Sundown Town and Glendale as well.
All right. I'm sorry about that. I was muted. So yeah, thank you, Glendale Community College, for letting us be with you. And we're just the coalition. We're blessed to have people from GCC, a number of people involved, and just love seeing what happens at this college. And you're a big part of helping our city move forward and progress on issues of justice. And so we're grateful for you guys. I've been in Glendale now for about 10 years, lived and worked in Glendale. And with the events that have happened over the last few years that have elevated the issue of policing and race, I've talked about it with our church a few different times, and I talked about it after what happened with Michael Brown in Ferguson, and then after the shooting at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was after those sermons that people would talk with me, and members would start saying, "Do you know Glendale's history?" These are longtime members of our church. They said, "Did you know that Glendale was a sundown town?" And I said, "Sundown town? What's that?" And so they would talk about it, and they said, "Yeah, Glendale didn't let Black people live in the city for a long time." And it really got my interest up, and I looked into it a little bit more and then found things here and there. But where I had the real breakthrough was, you know what? You got to give a shout out to libraries. Libraries still matter. Libraries are as relevant now as ever. And between finding this book by James Lewin and working in the Glendale History Room at Central Library, I started to be able to unpack and dig into some of our history. And this book by James Lewin, Sundown Towns, is like the quintessential book right now. There's really not much else out on this. Is what is really we're discovering is the whole sundown town thing is kind of like the secret American racial practice. Everybody knows about the South and the segregation of the South and Jim Crow and slavery and everything like this. And there's just not been very much talking, unless you were a Black person who was trying to survive when you traveled around the country. But people like me, we didn't know about it because it didn't affect us. But over 3,000 American towns across the country were sundown towns at some point in the 20th century, and over 100 towns in the state of California. California, progressive, wonderful California, over 100 towns. And not just out in the rural areas of California, but Glendale, South Pasadena, Burbank. These cities were sundown towns. And what James Lewin realized when he did this research is so much of what happened in these cities across the country were documented only anecdotally. It was word of mouth. It was word of mouth between people of same color. So white people knew, kind of wink and a nod, how the city operated, and African Americans knew where they needed to be and where they shouldn't be when it got dark. How this looked was basically, if you were a person of color, you could work in the city of Glendale during the day. You could work at the hospital. You could work in homes. You could work in hotels. You could work in doing the different jobs of the city. But you had to leave town at sundown. And this was known. You had to leave town. We know this was, and we know this worked because we have on the screen, in 1920, 14 years after Glendale was established, 0.16% of Glendale's population was African American. What that means is it means there were a few housekeepers in rich homes who had their own room in a house. And so they were technically residents, but they were basically servants of the people who actually owned the home. No one owned a house in Glendale if you were a person of color. And lost my place in my notes. I apologize. So you had people, at the end of the day. So if they weren't a housekeeper with their own room, you would have this thing. And I heard members of our church and people from the community tell me about this. They remember seeing, as the sun started to go down in Glendale, you went on the main thoroughfares of Glendale, you would see people of color lined up at the bus stop. And they were waiting for the bus to get back down to Los Angeles or get back to the city where they lived, where they were allowed to live. And so there was this ritual and rhythm to city life where you saw people leaving the town as the sun went down. And then the police would be on patrol. And when they saw somebody of color, they would pull over. And we don't have any evidence that they were as brutal as we saw in that clip from Lovecraft Country. But they would either say, you keep walking and you stay walking down the street till you get outside the city limits. You know, if you're on Colorado, keep going east on Colorado till you get to Eagle Rock, or you keep going down Glendale Avenue to the south until you hit LA. Or they would even put them in the car and transport them to the city line. They did this so effectively for so many years that with no laws on the books, as far as we've been able to discover so far, we have had a sundown town operating from 1906 until the 1960s, when federal civil rights laws undid that work. And the ongoing effect of that has been Glendale is still known as a place where African Americans need to be more careful. Look at the census report in 2019. Population of African Americans in Glendale, 100 years later, is still only 1.6% of the population, whereas the population of African Americans across this county of Los Angeles is 9%. Glendale has been the poster child for how to successfully run a sundown town. It did its job. You can look at phone books. You remember, most of you who go to college don't know what a phone book is, but there was a time before the internet when you had these thick phone books, especially in cities like Los Angeles and Glendale, these thick books that had everybody's phone number in it. Isn't that amazing? And they got distributed to your house every year. It's this really weird thing that used to happen in society. And one of the things that you would find in the phone books in the 30s, or all the way as long as phone books were in practice, cities would use those phone books to toot their own horns about how great they were as cities and how wonderful they were. And so Glendale would talk about how great of a city it was in its phone book. And in its phone book, it would say, we successfully keep our city all white. In fact, we got this designation, All-American City, because we had done such a good job of keeping the city white, that it was a marketing feather in the cap to be able to say how good the city was at keeping the place all white. But the real way that the city stayed white was real estate. As land was bought and purchased, and groups of plots of land were purchased, covenants would be set up that these properties would only be allowed to be bought and sold by Anglo-Saxon people. And let's be clear, it's not even white in general, it is Anglo-Saxon, not to Jewish people, not to light-skinned people of different cultures, Anglo-Saxon people, white, waspy people, people like me. I'd have no problem in Glendale. They did this by these covenants that said you can't buy or sell to anybody other than Anglo-Saxon, and you cannot rent to anybody besides Anglo-Saxon. These covenants were put in place and they were enforced and were legal, again, until the 1960s, when civil rights legislation made them illegal and could no longer be officially enforced. But when you have when you have the unofficial enforcement of keeping healthy neighborhoods, keeping attractive neighborhoods, keeping the riffraff out of the nice neighborhoods with the nice lawns and the picket fences in Glendale, you had this practice develop called redlining, where real estate agents and lending companies would develop maps and they would identify them with a 4-color system. You had green areas, which were the best areas in town. Those were where the good people lived, the hoi polloi. You had the blue neighborhoods, which were solid, good communities, neighborhoods to live in. Then you had yellow areas that were starting to show signs of attracting some undesirable elements, i.e. non-Anglo-Saxon. We're starting seeing more Jewish activity or Italian activity or Armenian activity, not the traditional Anglo-Saxon folks anymore. And then you had the red areas that were just considered the worst residential areas in the city. And those were usually located near the industrial areas where the land and the air and the water was more toxic. And those were understood to be the areas where the least desirable people would live. And so lenders would rarely lend to people who were looking to buy or purchase homes in yellow areas, and would never lend money to somebody wanting to purchase in red areas. And then real estate agents would make sure that only the right people would consider buying properties in the blue and green areas, and then would work with the lenders to make sure that those people got approved so that they could purchase homes. And so the blue and green areas continued to stay lily white. And then what happens in the yellow and red areas is you have a lot more rental properties that after the 60s would become rental properties that you could, to some degree, start renting to people different than Anglo-Saxons. But if you'll notice, even at this map, it's a little bit hard to see, but where you see the green and blue areas, you're basically looking at Glendale north of the 134. You're looking at Glendale and La Cañada and Verdugo Hills, and those areas have kept, and even to this day are still considered the prime properties in real estate in Glendale. South Glendale was considered the place where if non-white people were going to live, they would be living south of the 134 and especially south of Colorado Boulevard, Colorado Avenue. And that has been thanks to the FHA, federal lenders, by private banking lenders, and by the real estate industry, have all worked together to keep those areas the way they are. And so it's no wonder that because of the legal ways that property was kept from people of color, and then the practices even after the laws didn't allow it, it's no wonder that extremist groups and hate groups like the Ku Klux Klan and like the American Nazi Party and like other far-right racist groups would consider Glendale to be an attractive place to locate, to have headquarters. There was headquarters for the KKK in La Crescenta back in the 20s, right there at Glendale Community College on that land. There used to be an airfield owned by Mr. Brand. If you know about Brand Boulevard and Brand Library, Mr. Brand owned property right around where the college is today. And there was a huge Klan rally in 1924 where they recruited new members, and at least 300 new members were recruited to the KKK in the 1924 rally. They had a picnic, a barbecue, baseball game. I mean, it was all a wonderful weekend. Oh yeah, there was the cross burning, and oh yeah, there was that marching and all in the robes and the stuff, and about keeping America truly American with only true Americans belonging. I mean, there was that stuff too, but I mean, it was a great picnic. That happened right there around GCC's campus back in 24. Closer to World War II in the 30s, the German American Bund Party really grew in influence, and that was a lot of German Americans buying into the philosophies of Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany and wanting to see similar things happen in the US. And the German Bund was very active in Los Angeles and had a lot of rallies up at what is now Crescenta Valley Park up in La Crescenta, but it was called back then Hindenburg Park. And you can find video clips of Nazi rallies right there in La Crescenta at Crescenta Valley Park, and people, you know, raising their arms to say Heil Hitler, swastikas. It was a large surging movement. But then as we entered World War II, then everybody started to turn against Nazism. And so the Nazi movement of perpetuating white racial superiority fell into disrepair for a couple decades, while during World War II and the aftermath of World War II, where Nazism carried such a bad name. But then by the 1960s, both Nazis and the KKK experienced a resurgence in response to the civil rights movement. And again, Glendale was an enclave of a lot of people who were not so fond of the civil rights movement. And the Nazi Party and the KKK believed they'd find welcome in the community. Thankfully, they did not find as much of a welcome in the community as before. The press, the police, city government did not want the reputation of having those people in the city. And so even though there was things happening behind the scenes, officially, the city was against those events. There was a resurgence of activities again in the late 70s and 80s. I'm not going to go too much into that, but if there's a question about it at some point, we can go into that. But one other story quickly, one other note, Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale wouldn't bury Black people until the late 1960s. And there used to be a big pool, I think in Verdugo Park. It's called the Verdugo Plunge. And one story was told that a white family from Tahunga just wanted to go swimming there because it was a great place to go swimming, and when public pools were a big thing. And so they went down there, and as they were standing in line, they saw a sign that said, "Please show your ID. Only residents of Glendale are allowed to swim." And they said, "Oh, well, they're not going to let us in." But as they got up to the front of the line, the person accepting payment to let them in, he didn't ask to see their ID, and they walked right in. And then he realized, where he put two and two together, he realized that ID checkpoint was just to make sure that people of color understood that they weren't going to be allowed to enter and swim at the pool. So again, these official policies, these unofficial anecdotes, all these things working together, Glendale, amazingly successful sundown town. I'll turn it back to Tara.
I think Tara, you might be muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Todd, for that great overview. So one thing that I wanted to just point out as a resource, if you're looking for more information about Glendale's racist past and the history of Glendale, for the first time ever, the City of Glendale and Reflect Space put together a virtual exhibit around racism and resistance in Glendale. It's called The Reckoning. I invite everyone to make sure they check this out. It is, they have actual episodes. They're releasing episodes each week. And I'm going to show you a quick episode, episode 1 about the All-American City, which Todd did reference, which was really basically a code word for a white city. But they have released up to, I think they've They already released the first 3, so you can learn about the Glendale's restrictions and fight for fair housing, about the Ku Klux Klan, about the Nazis. There's also information about the modern day white supremacy, and then also some of the work that we've done around reconciliation and healing. So just really quickly, I want to share this. It's actually a really cool setup here, and let me see if I can find out how to do this. Gosh. Oh, wait, here we go. Sorry about that, folks. Bear with me. Actually, let me go to I will just I will show you the trailer because that's just easier for me to get to because this is.
Glendale, the jewel city of Southern California and home to over 200,000 people. For many, Glendale is a place of hope and prosperity, but the city has a history of racial discrimination.
Glendale wasn't a place where Black people lived. Sundown Towns were created to keep Black people in their place. We were only good enough to be their servants, to work in their towns for them. But once the sun went down, we needed to get out.
If you were Black and you arrived in Glendale, then the police would typically stop you, query you, and you would be informed that you could not stay in Glendale, California by the time the sun went down.
Glendale's largest demonstration took place in 1924, and there were 3,000 Klansmen and 15,000 spectators.
These events have shaped Glendale, and the effects of systemic racism continue to resonate in our community today.
We really are focusing on institutional racism. We're looking at all of these institutions that. So I just really encourage people to make sure you go and check out, let me see if I get back to, check out that exhibit, check out all of the different episodes if you want to learn more about Glendale's history. It's a really amazing project that was done. And one of the things I think is important to note in that project is one of the things that's missing is Black voices. And that's because Black voices were missing for the narrative of during these times when Glendale was growing into a city. And so it's really important to check that out and share that information. Next, we want to kind of transition because I know there's a lot. It's heavy to hear about all of this past. But I really want to talk about the passage of the Sundown Resolution and what that meant for us as a community and why it was so extremely important, and also share some of our advocacy strategies, because it wasn't like we were able to just go to the City of Glendale and say, hey, we want this resolution passed. And they were like, okay, we support it and we're going to pass it. There really was advocacy that had to happen around to mobilize to get the City of Glendale to take action. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, the role of the faith community, which has been extremely important into our able to mobilize the community and our advocacy strategies. So really quickly, and then I'll ask Todd to also kind of share, and we could just kind of have a conversation about the Sundown Resolution. And so this really, the Sundown Resolution became a priority for the Coalition for an Anti-Racist Glendale after the murder of George Floyd. And one of the things, as cities were reckoning and trying to figure out what they can do to take accountability, we wanted to make sure the City of Glendale was also a part of that national dialogue. And so passing the Sundown Resolution became a priority for the City of Glendale, before the Coalition. The City of Glendale at that time presented another resolution around being equitable and being fair and inclusive, something that we all support. But we also knew that if the City of Glendale was not willing to, number one, acknowledge and apologize and atone for its racial history, how can we ever move forward towards true inclusive and true equality for all and equity for all? there is just no way. And so the coalition worked extremely hard to draft a resolution that we wanted it to be a tool for us to use as we continue to fight for equality and equity within the city of Glendale. And so the coalition is a diverse group of folks who came together to advocate it for that. We were able to get over 500 people sign on to our support letter and get that to the city council members. We had people call in telling city council to pass this resolution. And from my experience, and I'll have Todd also share his experience in that process, it was a really interesting thing to see. One of the, some of the concerns from some city council members came up around, well, what does atonement mean? Are we going to have to pay reparations, right? Are we going to have to change the names are we going to find out things about Glendale's history, and we're going to have to change the names of street signs and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of concern about what does it really mean? And some people also on the other side felt like, well, this is just a piece of paper. They're just words. It's not going to change anything. And so what's really exciting about the Sundown Resolution, there is some action that has to be taken. The action includes the development of a written historic context paper that is specifically around people of color, African-American people, Latinx people, the API community that have been left out of Glendale's historical context. There have been several historical papers written about Glendale, and not one of them mentioned anything about the experiences of people of color. So that's one thing that is going to come out of that. The other thing that is coming out of that is also looking at policing and wanting us to look at what is our police doing in regards to ensuring that folks are not being profiled. And so it gives us a little bit of some teeth so that we can go back to city council and we can ask the right questions. And so, Todd, I wanted to kind of hand it over to you to see if you wanted to share some of your experience and why you think the faith community plays such an important role in advancing racial justice in our community.
Yeah, I think, and one thing, Tara, I was just going to mention that before we got to the Sundown Resolution was the march and rally that took place in Glendale a week or so after George Floyd's murder, and that had well over 1,000 people in attendance, and that I believe was a wake-up call to our city that there's a sizable movement afoot in our community to see real change. And so that action combined with then the coalition's work to get the Sundown Resolution submitted was a powerful 1-2 steps to move things forward. I think the faith community is important because, first of all, sometimes faith communities, especially in established churches who have had a long history in Glendale like mine, sometimes our congregations are where some of the last vestiges of old Glendale and old thought still exist. That some of those nice old church ladies, they like Glendale the way it was. And so the need for faith communities to address it within your own congregation is important, first of all, because sometimes religion, if it's not addressing what's happening in the real world and just talks about spirituality divorced from what's happening in the real world, a lot of that soft racism and hidden racism continues to be fostered in the congregation. And I guess I'm proud to say, because we talk about it in our church, people have left. So I guess that's a good thing. It is a good thing. Because we're going to make sure the faith communities need to make sure that it's clear within their group that we're no longer going to be a part of helping maintain a status quo. We're going to work for change. And then out in the community, even though faith communities in general are in decline in cities, they still can have a moral, ethical voice. And sometimes having a person in a clerical collar or with a yarmulke and a shawl speaking carries more weight for civic leaders than just a person in a suit or a pantsuit. Sometimes that still has a little more weight. And so using the pulpit in that way can truly make a difference. And we've seen that, I think, with some of the other congregations in our city and the leaders that have been involved. They make a difference. People listen just a little bit more because they've spoken up there.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that that's been my experience as an African-American woman coming into the city of Glendale, working for an organization whose mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. 4 years ago, I was like, how am I going to have this conversation about racism in Glendale? As an African-American woman, who do I need to kind of help speak up for me and open the door so that I can begin to help lead and navigate some of these conversations? And so that's kind of how Todd and I and some other folks kind of came together, because of really being able to move this forward and move this topic forward. It is something that we have been working on before the murder of George Floyd. The murder of George Floyd amplified that and actually made it possible for us to move the city forward much quicker than what we thought we were going to. We thought it's going to take at least 5 to 10 years before we got a Sundown Resolution passed, and and we were planning on strategizing and mobilizing, how do we do this? And so we were able to do that, I think, because of the diverse coalition that we have of groups that includes faith leaders and other civic leaders, and also making sure that the coalition is really centering around the lives of Black folks. And that's been a huge part of our coalition. We definitely understand the intersectional issues that folks of color face, people of color face, but we also know that Black folks are sometimes the ones that are facing the most harm in our communities. And so we keep Black voices centered in our coalition. At the same time, we come together to address issues related to LGBTQIA, issues related to folks who are Armenian folks, anti-Armenian, and all of those issues that impact our community. And so that's what really makes us proud to have the coalition. And so I'll just share my last little slide here about the coalition, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So this is actually a picture of the actual March for Black Lives that was organized by a Glendale Unified School District student, and some members of the coalition were a part of this as well, and Black in Glendale and the YWCA were a part of this amazing event that really led to the forming of this coalition. After this event happened, folks were like, what next? What are we going to do next? We can't just let this be the end. And so the coalition was put together to address institutional and structural racism in our community by identifying harmful patterns and practices that directly impact the lives of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and by developing actions, campaigns, and policy proposals to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in all communities, including but not limited to LGBTQI plus identities, other social identities that intersect with race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and ability status. It's a lot, it's a mouthful, but the coalition right now is focusing on three core issues, two core issues: policing in Glendale. We did a public records request act, and we have a student from Oxy who is looking at all the police arrest data. And we're also looking at housing discrimination and how that's impacting people of color today in the city of Glendale. Those are the two main issues that we're focusing on right now. And our ultimate goal is to go back to the city of Glendale, reminding them of this commitment to making Glendale an equitable and just community, and presenting policy recommendations for both the policing and housing areas as a starter. So with that being said, I will stop and I will turn it over to the facilitators.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I think some of the stuff I didn't even know, even though I've read a lot. But I think it's important to understand the history And then with our theme of celebrating Blackness, I think the steps that the coalition is pushing for, and the city actually passing the resolution, etc. So we're going to get there, but it'll take some time. And I just want to mention, if I'm wrong, please correct me, Tara or Todd. Glendale became the first California city to pass such a resolution, correct?
Yes. First in the state, third in the nation.
Okay, and I just heard, I didn't know it, but Burbank passed it in November, December with the help of Glendale, actually. So now we have two neighboring cities who have passed such a resolution. With that, I'm going to go to Kevin and David. Are there questions that you have? And I'm going to also allow people to just unmute themselves if they need to ask.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
Do you want to go first, Kevin, or want me to go first?
You can go ahead first.
Okay. So it says, bear with me, it's long. It says, Glendale acknowledging its sundown past is a sign of incremental change, albeit performative in nature. Todd, you mentioned 0.16 Black people lived as domesticated workers roughly 100 years ago. And according to the 2019 census, 1.6 live in Glendale. That's shameful. The practice of redlining in Glendale's green and blue areas has disproportionately affected Black people, and one could argue it has attributed to the wealth gap. Homeownership is one of the top contributors to household and generational wealth. Glendale needs to do more to atone for their past. Is creating a first home time ownership program for Black and brown people a priority? If not, it's desperately needed. You can't have equity in Glendale if the community itself doesn't look or feel equitable.
Absolutely, 100%. And it is the Sundown Town Resolution. It is a very small step. There's so much more that needs to be done. And part of the work of the coalition is really examining the policies and practices that are currently taking place in the city of Glendale and being able to go back to them and demand these type of changes that were just mentioned there. So thank you so much for that. If anybody would like to email me any policy recommendations you would like the coalition to consider, my email address is tarapeterson@glendaleywca.org. Even if you're interested in joining us on our next coalition call, you can also email me and we can touch base to see if it's something that you would like to be involved in. It's a volunteer-based community of organizers and civic leaders and faith leaders and parents. So please let us know your thoughts, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. I see, George, your hand is raised, but let me go ahead and ask this question first, and then we can go right to you. There was a student who asked a question regarding the redlining slide that you both had on your presentation and was wondering, for the blue and yellow areas, did that include or was not inclusive to Armenians, transitioning into Glendale during that time?
You would find that that if you, again, anecdotally, I think you sit down, you walk into an Armenian Apostolic Church and talk to some of the longtime residents, and you ask them about how was it for you looking for properties and homes? They would tell you it was difficult. They would talk to you about the discrimination. I would even argue that today you would look at, some people have said that we still have two Glendales. It's a different, and that's a gross oversimplification. But because there is such a large Armenian population, there is an understanding and there is a way of operating in Glendale, if you're an Armenian person, that you may not be able to get anywhere with old white Glendale. But Armenian Glendale will help you find housing, help you find a landlord if you're looking for a rental place that you can get housing, help you find work, that you operate and work within the Armenian community of Glendale. And I think that everyone was looking out for each other and taking care of each other, I think, when you saw Armenians starting to migrate into this community back in the 60s and the 70s.
Thank you, Todd. George, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thanks so much. I appreciate the time. I was just curious. The last time I walked the streets of Glendale was actually at that march last year. And I noticed on my way back that a lot of the street lamps, the lamp posts on one of them on Broadway, I remember it was Broadway, they still have swastikas decorated at the bottom of the poles. Are you guys aware of that? Is anything being done to remove those? I remember there was a ribbon, there were ribbons covering them. I thought that was a joke. And I thought that it was very offensive and but at the same time, very, it highlights exactly where we are at right now in Glendale. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm not sure if you guys are aware that those are still there. I'm not sure if they are still there. It's almost been a year since then.
They are still there. Yeah, they are still there. Todd, you can help me on this. So we've looked into that. We have not confirmed that they were swastikas, but there is this feeling that if people feel like they should be removed. And the ribbons were strategically placed, not to, because we just didn't want to see them. And so Black in Glendale, they went out and put ribbons on them because we didn't want to see them. But yeah, it's something that we haven't confirmed whether or not, if it's true or not. But Todd, do you have any background on that?
Yeah, I think that it's the same thing as it's unclear of the history of it. I mean, but it seems suspicious because of everything else with Glendale's history. But I mean, there is obviously the swastika was a symbol that was used long before Nazism and is used by other religious cultures. So it's, who knows if it was considered. I mean, yeah, I even find myself even sounding silly talking about it because of everything with Glendale's history. But I guess that's one of the things that's still but certainly that those type of things need to be addressed. And absolutely. I think even if there is no general understanding of the swastika anymore that's not tied to Nazism. So even if it meant something in the past that was different, it's certainly, we know how it's generally used now.
Absolutely.
And one of our librarians and one of our faculty members put some links about the lamppost specifically.
I love that idea. I think we should definitely be on our list of things to ask the City of Glendale to remove, for sure, because I think we all feel the same way, totally.
I know that we have a couple of more hands raised and it is 4 o'clock. So if you would like to stay, feel free to stay. But Tanita, if you want to take the floor, go ahead and ask your question.
Peace, everybody. Hey, Tara, Todd.
Hi,
hey, family, Hoover. Thanks for having us. I'm Tanita Faggiola with Black in Glendale. And I just wanted to say to any of the students that are here from Glendale Community College to not underestimate the power of your voice as young people in a community. If you're young, because I know Glendale Community College also has, non-traditional students as well. How important your voices are, how important the voices of the youth were in this movement in Glendale and getting the Sundown Resolution passed, but also just getting us as adults and people who were committed to this community to move a little faster, swifter, and with a sense of urgency, knowing that the youth were important and that they really were affected. Prior to George Floyd and the vigil and the Sundown Resolution passing, we had come together and did some work in the Glendale Unified School District. And as opposed to the city starting first and it having a trickle down effect, it had a trickle up effect. And so, and it was because of the young voices, the young people standing up and saying that, the residuals of being part of a sundown town is that it affects every aspect of the city. Most importantly, including the schools, inside the schools, and not just for the few Black students that are in the schools, but it's a disservice to all of the students who go to Glendale Unified School District who are not taught or there's an exemption of Black history, the history of African Americans in the city, the contributions that African Americans have brought to the nation, the world, California, and then the city of Glendale is huge. And so those are just some things for folks to consider. I just wrote down some few notes. You know, the white flight to La Crescenta and La Quillada and its connection with JPL and the German workers who were there. And that's kind of how it interconnects with the Nazi community, a Nazi, German Nazi kind of concept that was there. And it's still there now. You know, you can't even hardly rent up in that area. You can rent in Glendale if you're Black, but you can't even rent up in La Crescenta or La Quillada at this point. So it's still there. And so there's all those kinds of things that is happening. If you're out and you're working and what you're doing is repelling people, if what you're saying in your church is repelling people, like Todd said, people are leaving, then you know you're doing a good job. And so just big ups to all those who are who are working hard at being anti-racist, working hard at being allies, working hard at standing in your truth and speaking your voice is much needed and appreciated. And we need more of it, not just here in the city of Glendale, but beyond. And so we need to keep working and stay on top of it. So I appreciate, you know, that's just the thoughts and the comments about what are we doing next and how are we going beyond the performance and what's performance for them. What might seem like performance doesn't necessarily mean that it is performance. It also can be momentum. And that's what we got from requesting that Black History Month is acknowledged, requesting that Black Lives Matter curriculum is in, requesting that there's some equity in the teachers and the administrators in the school district, requesting that we have a march and a visual, requesting that you acknowledge the Sundown Resolution. It might seem like performance, but really we're using it to motivate, to inspire, to get people to move to action.
Yes, thank you, Tanita. What a lovely treat. Thank you, Tanita, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's just so fitting with the next question that we have from another student after Tanita's call for action. This question goes for Tara and Todd. GCC by extension inherits and upholds the legacy of Glendale's historically white supremacist ideals. While there are efforts being made by students and faculty within GCC, will the coalition be collaborating with GCC's leadership / organizers to ensure that this accountability extends to the college campus as well?
Yeah, I would love to figure out how we can do that. I know we have some, I know Hoover is on our coalition, but I know we need to really work closely with your students to find out what are some of the most pressing issues. I know there are issues with the Glendale Police, Glendale Community College Police as well. So yeah, I think we have to figure out how do we develop a comprehensive and collective approach that we're addressing all systems and institutions within the city of Glendale. And so absolutely want to figure out how we can do that. And, you know, again, like what Tanita says, you know, it's really the young folks that are going to really help us move and help folks to begin to take action. So would love to hear from anybody that would be interested in either joining Black in Glendale. You can reach out to Tanita. If you're interested in being a part of the coalition, you can reach out to myself. But definitely, there definitely needs to be a concentrated effort to make sure we're addressing all the systems that impact people of color.
And honestly, we need and we don't want to come in and take the lead on what's happening at Glendale Community College, but where we can be support, we actually need there needs to be groups all over the city addressing different issues. Even our coalition has people focusing on different areas. And so where we can be some of the wise old people to young energy, that's what we can do to come alongside and bring our voices along when needed. So very much we're looking at a collaborative effort, not we're the only ones doing the work, but where we can come alongside and support you guys. That's going to be really important, and we'd love to do that.
Thank you so much. In this moment of time, I don't have any other questions directly messaged to me. What about you, David?
Let me check, just make sure I'm not missing anything. well, you already mentioned about being part of coalition by your email, so send Tara an email. And what can the STEM department at Glendale College do to be more anti-racist? Maybe that can be a question for Glendale, but I'm just curious if the coalition had any thoughts on that.
I would definitely invite, we launched, YWCA Glendale launched its 21-day racial justice challenge. I invite you all to go to our website. All of that material is on there. I think the first thing that, folks can do is really just that individual kind of learning and expanding your own knowledge base. And the 21-day racial justice challenge is a way for you to do that, for you to personally do that. But also, if you want to do it as a group, you can utilize it as a group to where you can reflect on some of the questions that we asked together and really see if the learning is really transferring, the knowledge is being transferred. And so I definitely would encourage folks to do that as a starting point. That's the most recent kind of resource that I have.
And then there's more of a statement. Sandy Somo said the Urban League San Diego is looking to help 37 African-American folks' families achieve home ownership this year with a $49,000 grant for each family. We need to get Glendale to do something similar. So there's precedent in the other communities for doing so.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you for that.
Sandy just posted the link for that program. So
I'm going to save the chat.
Look at it, and the chat will be saved. So the link will be.
Thank you, Sandy.
Any other questions?
I just received a question here. Okay, would an African American be able to preach and teach God's word? How would Glendale, California respond to that? Respond being in caps.
I think it would all depend on the congregation that person went to, and in my congregation, that happens a couple times a year at least, and I know there's a number of other congregations that would be welcoming. But again, that's one of those telltale signs about Glendale is there an AME church in Glendale? No, there's not. Are there any historically Black churches in Glendale? No, there are not. One synagogue in Glendale has suffered its prejudice against it, vandalism against it. It's survived. There's a second Jewish synagogue in Glendale. But yeah, look, there are Spanish-speaking congregations in Glendale. There's Filipino congregations in Glendale. There are a lot of Armenian apostolic churches in Glendale. There has been no need for an African-American congregation to exist to serve African-American people in the city, because there's still not a lot of African-American people who are looking for a church in the city of Glendale. So they have to try to join in with one of the churches that are historically white, that are more diverse now, but still carry that historically white heritage.
Thank you, Todd. I see Tanita's hand raised again. Let me go ahead and spotlight you.
So yeah, you either do that or you go outside of the city, you leave, which
South
is
LA.
close too, right?
Right.
Right, we go to the other side, go to the west side. What I wanted to say to that was that, having a Black person preach or even lead a church here should not be about catering to its Black constituents. It should be okay for white people and Armenian people and Asian and Latino people to have a Black pastor. That should be okay. That's what we should be working towards. We keep limiting and creating this boundary about what, we allow this white supremacy consciousness to tell us that we need Black things in our city for the Black people. The Black people know how to get out of the city and get what they need. If we don't, we create it, like we created Black in Glendale. What we're saying is this should not be even happening, because it should be okay for you to have a Black grocer or a Black baker. It should be okay for this city to have those things. It should be okay for you to have a Black teacher and majority white students. They should see it. This is what our world is made up of people. And so that's kind of where we want to take our scope, if I may ask you to explore that. Why is that? Why do we even think like that? That it has to be for us? It's for you. And that's what really being an anti-racist is about. It's dismantling this pathology and this thought that it can only be for Black people. So just something for you to think about. And as we, as you begin to explore, because that's what where we get when we head on. When I first moved here, that was the first thing people said. Black people asked me, what am I doing in Glendale? And white people and Armenian people asked me, what am I doing in Glendale? It was so questionable. That's how I knew it was a sundown town. So, just something for us to really, really think about. We had a Black fire chief here at one time. No one knew about it, said anything about it. It wasn't even, but we had one. We had a assistant lieutenant here at one time. There was, different people. So what is that about that we only feel that it's for the Black people? When we ask those questions. Same thing with Glendale GCC College in particular. What are you doing for your college community? Not just what are you doing for the college, the Black students. Yes, the Black students need assistance. What are you doing for your college community that is helping to shift things, really, really create true shift?
Thank you so
much. I will
much.
say this as a shout out to a couple of congregations in my own denomination. The Vallejo Drive Adventist Church, which is right adjacent to Adventist Health Glendale, is currently led by an African-American pastor. And that was a historically white congregation. And then Eagle Rock, which is Glendale adjacent, is led by a woman African-American pastor who was previously the associate pastor here at the church I serve. And so there is, at least I know of those two congregations that that are historically white, that have brought in African-American pastors who are leading their congregations. And I think that's a testimony to those congregations that they were open to that, an encouraging sign.
So I just want to wrap up and thank you both so much. Please let them know how appreciated their presentation was. For sharing this time with us. I'm just gonna close our meeting with just a quick announcement about our last final, I should say, for this year presentation for Black History Month. It is on Thursday from 12:30 to 2 with Dr. Brad Elliott Stone. And it's appropriately as our last event called Celebration, Not Lamentation. So hopefully you all can join us. It's open to the community, so anyone can join us at the same link that you attended this. Again, thank you all. Have a great evening. We've been enlightened. We've learned a lot. And you're being modest, saying you're not experts. Both of you.
We're not.
Amazing knowledge.
Thank you, guys.
Great to be with you.
Bye, everybody. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you
so much.